We are going live. It is booting up. Countdown. 6, 3, 2, 1. All right, we are live on Facebook. Look at us.
Look at us.
Look at us. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Rapping black men. Okay. And there's our boy Torrance. He's coming in.
Apology.
None needed, good brother.
How y'all doing this afternoon?
Hey, man.
We good.
Good.
Yeah,
Better
man. How you
now.
doing?
Yeah.
Let me make sure this is broadcasting. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, sure.
Yep, it sure is. Oh, this is beautiful. Okay.
There we go.
New technology. We with it. We with it.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to share it now. Bear with us, folks. We're figuring out all the tech today.
This feels like the gig, too. I don't know if you guys have had to do this with Zoom calls or getting your guests on. And well, I know Brandon has. I know the Jam does this extensively. But this is, it's a new normal, man. It's something to get used to.
It is the new normal.
Man, I have to get this haircut right quick. I wasn't going to embarrass my family. Y'all know.
Never an embarrassment, bro. Never an embarrassment.
Mr. Poe, how you doing, man?
Yeah.
I'm surviving, brother. I'm surviving, you know.
Your mental health is okay?
Health is okay. I don't got the COVID, so I'm good, you know.
That's good.
Blessings all around. Let's see.
It's funny, man, on some level when I see what a lot of people, I don't know if y'all deal with this too, almost like a survivor's guilt. Like when you see what a lot of people are going through right now, you know, sometimes, you know, because we're in the public eye, we get so many encouraging messages. And I'm like, you know, I'm okay. I'm really want to make sure that you are asking the people in your life that are probably dealing with this more closely, are they okay? Because, you know, by God's grace, we all are employed. You know, we don't have anything. Our families are well. So, you know, it's an interesting time.
It really is.
Survivor's guilt, man. I feel that across the board. I feel like being black men, we have that survivor's guilt because we saw so many people who didn't make it. I had high school friends who were killed, you know what I mean? Locked up. Just the fact that we're breathing, we get another 24 is just enough to me. That's what really, the quarantine has allowed me to really slow up everything and just appreciate the day we have because that's not promised. Somebody could snuff our life out tomorrow or tonight. You got to take advantage of that. You got
to. All right. Well, we got everybody here. So I say we get started. All right.
Rock and roll, baby.
All right. You know, I want to welcome everyone at home to the NABJ Chicago chapter, Facebook and Instagram for our annual Black Male Media Project discussion, Reporting in Race. I'm Brandon Pope, anchor and reporter at CW26 here in Chicago. I'm also the National Broadcast Task Force co-chair and vice president of broadcast for our local NABJ here in Chicago. So it's been an exhausting week. This discussion really couldn't come at a better time. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor in Louisville has arisen sort of this reckoning when it comes to racism in this country. When you see what's happening with Drew Brees and so many others, it's something that seeps into every industry, including journalism. And while the recent news has this on everybody's mind right now, it's nothing new for us. You know, we've been hurting, we've been struggling, we've been fighting, and we've been needing change. We know the issues, and my hope here is that our non-Black people that are watching can learn from hearing our perspective and become change agents in their newsroom and allies. I hope this can be also therapeutic for us and for our Black men, and also inspire them, letting them know they are not alone. We've been there, we are there, and we can build each other up together. Now, this is a live discussion. We want you to be a part of it, so please chime in with your questions, your comments, your memes. Have some fun. If you want to poke some fun at somebody's outfit, go ahead, okay? Charles.
See, well, I had to do it.
My hairline is rapidly receding, but we stressed out here in these streets below.
But please, give your questions, Facebook, Instagram. We're going to be using them. But first, let's get to know our panel. I want each panelist to go around, introduce yourselves, and tell us what being a Black man in media means to you. Let's start with Domity.
Domiti Pongo, host at MTV News right now. MTV as well. I host a show called True Life Crime, where we investigate mysterious deaths that happen to people, but it offers us a chance to expand those conversations and talk about societal ills that contributed to what they went through. We did the Kanika Jenkins story in Chicago, and it gave us an opportunity actually in that episode to talk about police brutality and the apathy of police in the situation of what happened to Kanika when her mother was trying to raise awareness about her daughter going missing. And being a Black man to me right now means being a griot, means sharing our stories, means building upon the work of the ancestors and doing the best that I can to add to that legacy.
All right. Charles.
Charles Preston. I am currently the audience engagement manager for Injustice Watch. I have a history of reporting on Black community with the Chicago Defender. To answer that question, what does being Black in the space of media, or being a Black man in the space of media mean? To me, it means responsibility. We have a responsibility to convey the truth and the whole truth. Yeah, and also like advocating for our Black men in these spaces as well. So,
Torrance.
I'm just a humble servant from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm a news associate / shared news desk writer at Associated Press. As a Black man, first I'm a Black man before I'm a Black journalist. And I think it's important for me to note that it shapes and informs all of my perspective and how I approach my work. I think we're all vessels that our ancestors are speaking through. I think it's a spiritual thing for me. When I write these stories, I don't necessarily have to put in much work. It's really our ancestors speaking through us to tell those stories that were often neglected and ignored. And now that we have these bullhorns and massive platforms, we have to use those responsibly. And I'm ready to step up and rise to the occasion. I feel like in the darkest moments is where you can shine a light on what's real. And I think this is a budding ground for a revolution outside of the newsroom, but a revolution inside of those newsrooms. And I think that's where we step in and where we can really make the difference and change. Rewrite the narrative, baby.
And Jamal.
Yeah, Jamal Collier. I cover the Bulls for the Chicago Tribune, and for all the reasons that y'all just said about being Black male in the media, I agree with. And I think one of the things that I want to add to it is that it is also to be growing up when I wanted to do journalism relatively early. I kind of figured this was a thing. Really, I was like, wow, they're going to pay people to write about sports every day. That sounds pretty fun. But for me, when I thought more about being able to cover, especially in the NBA and athletes, Black athletes, that and have somebody that, I guess, just representation, and have somebody that looks like these athletes, that understands these athletes, that understand what they had to deal with, that to go through, that had to and are still dealing with, even when they do make it. I think that was a big thing for me, and it's still as I continue in my career, is trying to give just the way that the media portrays these Black men in the NBA, and some of the ways they've been able to take power, athletes have been able to take power and make decisions for themselves. All those things are sort of appeal to me. So all the things y'all just said about telling stories for people whose story were often ignored or worse. And I think that all those things are something that's important to me. Well, I'm excited to be in this space and excited to be here with y'all.
Once again, I want to invite everybody that's viewing right now to chime in with your questions, your comments. We'll be bringing them in throughout the discussion. I want to start broadly and then zero in with this discussion. Lots of talk about race in America right now. Frankly, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of talking. There's been a lot of discussion, too many forums and chats and conversations about race. And yet,
my friend said it's real hot to be Black right now, because it is everybody wants to get you on their podcast, on their show, on their whatever to talk about it. And
it's like the new Renegade Challenge.
This is the Ask a Negro portion of the segment. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you know, you know.
Hey, we experts. But I do want to get y'all's perspective on this. We've been doing this for so long, trying to have these conversations. What is not connecting about race in our experience? Why have we not made a breakthrough yet?
A lack of empathy. I don't think everybody views us as human beings. When I go out here and cover these communities, it's personal for me. I don't have that distance that some white people can have when they come out and cover these stories. I know I too can be pulled over by the cops, and I could too face police brutality. That's not lost on me. It informs my perspective. And also, as a Black reporter, Frank, you have to become like a psychologist. You know what I mean? You have to kind of really break down these societal ills, and I think also media literacy comes into play. I have to explain to people when I'm in the streets, this is what I'm asking of you, and this is why I need it from you. And I think that's not anything a white reporter would consider. They go get that quote and they go back to their newsrooms. It's not the same compartmentalization that they have to think about. I have a duality in any white space I go in. I know who I am as a Black man, but I also know how you perceive me. And I have to think about both of those things at the same time. That's really psychologically, physically, and emotionally taxing. And I ain't gonna take up all of y'all space, but I think that's where it starts for me. I think it's a lack of empathy. There's no policy that can legislate the heart. They have to change their spirits, hearts, and minds. It's not up to us. Our job is to equip them with the information, and it's up for them to make that change.
On that piece about equipping them with the information too, I think we're fighting an uphill battle because so many of our white counterparts have been miseducated throughout their careers so long, just as we've been miseducated when we were young people about what our ancestors meant, and that we did have Black ancestors that were great aside from Martin Luther King. Right. You know what I mean? And so when it comes to white folks, when we're doing these stories and you're trying to tell them how your learned experience informs how you approach covering these stories, they don't have the lexicon for that empathy, because their whole career they've been taught something different and they've experienced something different. So they think that when you're coming in with this learned experience, this perspective, these anecdotal experiences that inform your reporting, they think that it's biased. They read that as you're coming into the story with a bias. It's like, no, I'm coming in with facts. It just so happens I've lived these facts.
Facts.
Yeah, I would say like these structures and these systems and the concept of journalism as we know it is racist. Like all of these structures are like inherently, we live in an inherently racist country. If we look at the history of the country, it's racist. And like when we're taught about journalism, these aren't like Black defined concepts. These aren't things that were created with our communities or like other oppressed communities in mind. You know, these are actually like white constructs. And so like when we actually do reporting that reflects the ideas and the views of Black people on the ground, we're called biased, you know, for our own lived experiences and how we perceive the world when the objective experience is naturally white. Mm-hmm. And that is something that has to be challenged constantly. You know, the kids out in my community, they can't relate to the New York Times. I'm sorry. Like they're not trying to pull up those feature articles from these white publications that have plenty of money back behind them. No, they want some real truth. So they're going to look at YouTube or World Star or like something that they can relate to that is culturally relevant to them in their lives. And so like J school journalism, like it hasn't been culturally relevant to the lives of Black people. We've always had to negotiate ourselves of how much we're going to compromise to enter these spaces, making those spaces already inherently racist.
And Jamal, you cover sports where race has intersected heavily. I mean, look at the Colin Kaepernick story and all the headlines recently, LeBron James and Drew Brees. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think about something that one of my friend Tyler Tynes, who works at The Ringer, has said mm-hmm. and wrote about before, just about how in general Black people and especially athletes, this idea that you're supposed to be seen and not heard almost, you know, mm-hmm. and the idea that, and especially the whole shut up and dribble that kind of happened a couple of years ago. I think LeBron and some of the basketball players are starting to speak out against Donald Trump in the same way of what happened with Colin Kaepernick. And I think that it's just that idea that people, I mean, when you think about the way the Black culture and Black everything is everybody loves, but when Black people try to speak or try to put whatever it might be, like how just people, that those voices are ignored and just are not have not been heard. And I think that's something I think about a lot, and it's something I think in this moment that also has really made me think I think I've appreciated the most is that, you know, people around the country are being heard, and you know you know, people always love to talk about the ways that people can protest and whatever, but y'all want to listen to those other ways and the other things that were sort of going on. And I think that one of the things I thought about is, you know, I had been in some level of the past couple of weeks between Ahmaud Arbery and I read about Breonna Taylor a couple of weeks ago, and just like certain things, even really before George Floyd was sort of the final kind of tipping point, the spark, kind of where we are. But I thought about how we've been in the house, quarantine. People have been going crazy over Tiger King and whatever else they can get their hand, their or whatever on entertainment. But Black people have been dying and still, and nobody really was thinking about this or cared or talking about this a month ago or a couple of weeks ago or whatever. And I still, just think about like, wow, it sort of took all of this and protests, and then protests that sort of got a little less peaceful and whatever, and for people to finally start saying, man, racism's still bad.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why we're here. That's why, the five of us are doing what we are doing, to ring that bell and be a voice. And I kind of want to hit on something both you, Jamal, and Charles were talking about, this idea of objectivity in journalism. This is something that I have been scolded about numerous times in my career, even in college. It does seem like objectivity upholds traditionally white supremacist institutions and doesn't exactly give light to Black viewpoints. And that's why our voice really matters. But how do we use that voice responsibly while also still being good journalists?
So I quick on that. I really, the more and more I get into my career, just really don't like the whole idea of objectivity, especially when you consider so often the default that most people's eyes is white. And that is sort of what people are coming from when you think about objectivity and such, is that the default point of view is status quo, white, and whatever. And I think pushing back on that in general, but I also think as journalists, our job often is to sort of cut through the BS that we have to do when reporting, writing, researching a story, and present to you what, like the facts are, right? Or what the actual kind of straightforward version of the story. Like, the public shouldn't just be thrown a bunch of information and they have to figure it out themselves. I mean, it's essentially what is at least for me, I think about my job is to say, what things based off what I've reported, the experience that I've had, people I've talked to, the things that I'm doing as a journalist, what comes out as the best framing for the story. And I think that just because we're Black and we have an experience in whatever, in these kind of stories, it just is really a shame that people sort of try to discredit that or try to think that you can't see it correctly, when often white people don't see stories of whiteness correctly at all.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Like, our job is just to tell the truth and contextualize it and do the best as we can with that. But we also have to notice, I truly believe objectivity, how we define it and how it's practiced in journalism, it's a white construct, and we have to negotiate with that often. And it's not only a white construct; it's how biases are already inherently to any work that we do, how we cover anything. I love my city of Chicago. I know if another writer writes about, Chicago, I'm gonna have some damn criticisms lined up, or nah, you didn't get this whole story. But Black people have been doing that with white media forever. And then the minute that we do get ounces of power, or we're in these positions to adequately tell our stories, we're faced with, this is a biased perspective. It's not well researched, and it's often coming from these institutions that can tell us nothing about our communities, our culture, our experiences. And as journalists and media makers, it is our responsibility to be the vanguard of that Black media revolution, in which we can create spaces for more Black men journalists, more Black women journalists behind us, so they don't have to negotiate with those power structures as we did.
It's ironic that the definition of objectivity is subjective in journalism. I think that's the thing that really that's the mind F of it all. I think about even just picking one example, when someone says it's become popular to use the phrase communities of color as accepted blanket term for minorities, but sometimes we use it when we're talking specifically about Black people. Right. And my Asian brothers and sisters, my Middle Eastern brothers and sisters don't understand our experiences the way we do. So though they fall in that of color category, it doesn't apply appropriately. But we don't interrogate that because objective journalism or these new standards that are set by whomever tells us that that is the proper terminology to use. And that's just one of those instances where I find myself using terminology that someone else told me was appropriate, even though I know from my own learned experience, it doesn't necessarily apply.
Let's be real. Racism isn't a both sides issue. And we need to like really just dismantle that notion. Racism this is human decency, human rights. We shouldn't make this politicized. And I think we've allowed established majority white media to kind of define that. And I think it's our turn to take that narrative and to recraft that and to reshape it into what it should be. We know what these things are and we've lived it. Our lived experience is our expertise. And that's what informs all of our reporting. It's why we can get the stories they probably can't. A grandmother in the hood who just lost her grandbaby might not want to talk to this apathetic white person who they know doesn't really care about them. But I'm going to sit her down. I might cry with her, give her a hug first before I even talk to her. That is the difference. You have to empathize with human beings before you treat them as subjects for your news story. Racism ain't a both sides issue, it's a right and wrong issue. And we should be at the vanguard at our publications and our media outlets of really dictating that. Everything should not get the credibility to be on a platform. If you know it's not based in fact, if you know it's a construct, you should throw that aside the same would you would anything else, an extra word in a sentence. You should copy edit all of that. But I think the revolution needs to happen in the newsrooms first. I think we need to revolutionize that by having more diverse and inclusive perspective. It's not enough to just have the black man and the black woman in there. Are you going to listen to them when they propose that story? I can't tell you how many people, I want it to be done and then I want it to be sports. I want it to be a sports anchor. But I also have to reconcile with the fact that I'm a black dude and all of my conscience is elevated after Trayvon Martin. I read The Fire Next Time and I had dragon fire coming out of my breath. I was ready to dismantle every system of white supremacy, right? But like sports didn't mean anything to me at that point. I had to really reshape how I wanted to even attack journalism because they told me, if you want to do sports, focus on sports. We don't have time to talk about race and all that. This was before it became trendy to intersect sports, politics, and social justice. Now you can do it and knock it out. But before then, they tried to box you in if you wanted to cover race. Like you can't cover there's no race beat. You can't cover these things. Now they realize that's the most important story of our lifetime. There is no more important story in this country than race. And who better to tell it than the heartbeat of this country, which are black people who have always been the checks and balances and who has always kept this country honest and assessed it for what it really was, not the idealism of what it could be.
I think real quick.
Guys, I'm gonna let y'all go on ahead and cook.
I had a real quick point on that about the idea of like the race beat in the newspaper, because I've heard that same thing before too. But I mean, every beat should be covering race. I mean, it is a story in every way. So every walk of life, every sport, every organization, every business, everything you're doing, that should be something you're informed. So white, black, whatever that is. If you're not covering it, then you kind of are, and I think that is also the sort of the point.
So as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about that, that black man or woman who just graduated college, got their first job, they're in a small market newsroom, or in a newsroom in general, may not be small market, that pushes them in a direction that doesn't allow them to use that voice. I had an example of someone who told me that their station is not covering the protests in their area. This is the story of our time, right. And a station is not covering it. So how do you be that change agent in a newsroom, especially when you are a minority, you're a black man or a black woman, and you're already in kind of a position where you can lose a lot?
I think you have to
struggle, right?
It's difficult, man, and it's hard for me to answer that question from a. I was lucky enough to start at WVON, black-owned station in the city, and then so my career path is topsy-turvy, and so I will acknowledge first that I'm coming and explaining this from an outside perspective where people might not have the agency to say some of the things I'm about to say, but in cases where, at least even at MTV, where I felt like a black story was being swept under the rug in lieu of other stories that were less important but more amenable to the mainstream, what I did was I came with facts. I said, yo, last time when we had a trending topic, we covered this story, and arguably this other story was more important that day. We went ahead and did this story. Today, this is the trending topic. Or whatever metrics, whatever things that your news director finds important, whatever rubric you guys go through when you're deciding what your story selection might look like, you got to go through their own process, use their process for your purposes. And I think sometimes in our explanation, when we're talking to white counterparts, you know, sometimes we make too much common sense, right? Like it's obvious, this is the big story. But how do you scale that back and look at objectively, what are the factors that our news directors are looking at when they're picking stories? And how do we make the case that this story checks off each one of those boxes? And then if the person says no, you have put them in a position where they have to admit they're saying no because you're Black and not because what you're saying doesn't make sense.
So I would never totally 100% agree with everything Domiti's saying. I can't find it in my heart to tell a Black person, like, you know, don't make no money because you're going to like, or compromise, you know, how much money they're going to make once they like get out of college and they got all this debt and everything. I think what's important is always having allies and always having people for support who can put pressure on folks that you can't. So these are white allies. These are like outside news organizations, outside reporters. Tell folks about what you're going through and call it out for what it is. If they're not covering the protests in your city around Black lives, they're racist. Just it's as simple as that. Just as simple as that. But if you cannot tell that story,
and bad editors,
horrible. And if you can't tell that story yourself, you need to rally. You need to organize. Like you need to rally around some allies, whether they be in your newsroom or outside of it, or in the digital space. Be like, yo, I'm a Black reporter. This is hell. We can't. I can't do this. I need pressure put on my editors. I need pressure put on my whoever's in charge. But that I believe allyship, that's where allyship comes in, because Black people cannot keep on negotiating whether we're going to lose income or be on the front line, basically trying to like start the revolution. Like, I believe we do have a responsibility to like move our people forward, but we also have to be strategic in that, right? And so like we have to exhaust all tools before we can like actually go and be like, I'm gonna write this piece anyway, put it on my Medium, and then what, you know? So we have to be smart and strategic, and yeah, allyship is key.
I was just gonna say, if I could just piggyback off that point really quickly too. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because allyship outside of, sometimes you have to organize outside of the newsroom to make sure that the public is pressuring your outlet the way you want them to, but make sure you start creating allies in the boardroom, at your company, in the management sector. Make friends that can advocate on your behalf, so you're not the only voice on whatever issue you're talking about.
Man, look, everybody needs OGs. Before you can be a master teacher, you have to be a great student, and you need to learn from people. I'm so grateful to have met a Black man hire me at AP. I have a Black executive at the top rank, and I have at the top editor at Race and Ethnicity at AP. I'm surrounded by Black people in power and on the ground. And really, editing is probably the only space where they really need to do better. And we're gonna challenge them on that. But I feel like you have to have OGs advocating on your behalf. Go to them. Let them be the vehicle to spur some things, because maybe they might not feel your voice at that. They might not respect where you are as far as the hierarchy of power. You have to, it's chess sometimes. You have to think kind of three. It's kind of like, you remember how growing up they tell you got to be three times better. No, this amount. The same thing applies when you get in the workforce. You have to really think smart, work smart, not hard. If you have somebody in that executive role who can really affect that change, put them aside, have coffee, have lunch, text them, give them a call. NABJ, I mean, the fact that we have a whole organization that is going to ride for us. I don't know. Omar got arrested last week. Everybody, come on, man, the cavalry.
Right. That's a fact.
We have to lean, especially in this time and climate, we have to lean on our community. We are literally all we have. We can't. And we talked about this yesterday briefly, but we all have a role to play. Executives have a role to play. ground journalists have a role to play. The public maintaining accountability in those newsrooms have a role to play. We all have our different lanes that we need to occupy. You know, I don't want to take up too much time, but we really have to lean in on our mentors and our community. That's literally
you spitting though. You spitting though.
Brother, you got to stop saying that, Torrance. This is your forum,
Yeah,
man.
go ahead. Wait,
this is the barbershop. You can take as much time as you want, bro.
That's that black pastor speaking, you know. I'm not gonna take
I ain't gonna take your time, but I got 10 more points.
Go to your neighbor.
Take them to church.
But no, I mean, for real, you need OGs to really lean on it. And you need a strong community, man. We're covering some of the most disgusting travesties ever, right? But like this has been 400 years now. So like I'm at the point now where am I even better served at just being a journalist as a black man? Because I feel like I need to be in these streets with pitchforks. You know what I mean? I feel the same rage they do, but I have to channel that anguish and rage for the productive good. I'm gonna use all of that to fire you up with facts. I'm gonna lay these facts out here so raw and uncut and transparent, you can't deny that. And if you do deny it, you are being willfully complicit, aiding and abetting in white supremacy. Call it for what it is, because that's your job.
Woo! Come on now.
Come on.
Let's move that collection plate around.
Hey, look, the doors of the church are open.
I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in here. If not, I've got a question from Facebook I wanted to pivot to real quick.
Run it.
Yeah. So
go ahead.
Yeah. So once again, if you're on Facebook right now, please keep chiming in with your questions. I'm loving the conversation going on right now. Andrea Watson, she asks, can you address white people covering racial issues? Should they be covering racial issues, or should it be black people? This is interesting because I think there's a part of us, I talked to some of my colleagues who don't like being the default black story person. The black reporter gets black stories, but we do have to use that voice. So what do you guys think about this?
I think absolutely. I think white people should be covering race issues, but they need to be informed.
Yes.
They need to know that race intersects everything.
Yes.
They need to be knowledgeable about the history of black people in this country. They need to be knowledgeable about our neighborhoods, the context in which people are living, actually have a relationship with the community. They could go ahead and report, but I believe there should be requirements before they do a report. You have to meet a certain type of, white person, in my opinion. Absolutely, we should do, black people we should cover the whole gamut. We should have the freedom to cover whatever we want. We shouldn't just be pigeonholed to one section of the paper. If we know race intersects everything, the world is our oyster. You know what I'm saying? So like we should be able to cover everything. White folks, they can cover race issues, and they have been. Yeah. They have been
doing it. Yeah.
They've just been failing miserably.
It's white supremacy.
Or they've been intentionally like demonizing us, criminalizing us, and not really talking about the whole truth. You know, they just point to these little factoids about black people, but they're not writing compelling narratives about us. They're not like
with white people when they cover race, they don't cover it with the same level of scholarship that they cover anything else. I've seen reporters from medical experts in the age of COVID-19. Why?
Yes.
Because they've called doctors and asked them.
Because it's your beat. Yes.
It's your beat. But when it comes to race, all of a sudden, the only research you do is ask the black guy in the newsroom.
Yep.
Like, the books have been written. Go Google the information the same way you did when you needed to understand how COVID droplets transfer the virus. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Look, they can tell you a JFK. They can tell you the breakfast sandwich he ate before he was assassinated. it takes a man being knelt on and the life being suffocated out of him. Oh, this is what black people were talking about all the time. So you just missed all of the centuries of oppression to skip to this cell phone viral moment to not have your reckoning of understanding what's really good in this country. We don't have time to handhold white people, frankly. It is your job. It's journalistic malpractice if you cannot cover race in this country, because that means you're not accurately depicting what's really going on in these communities. When I go into these communities, I see the poor health outcomes. I see the racial wealth gap, which is absurd in this country. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the lack of diversity in technology and science and STEM. We're not talking about education. We are more than just athletes and all of those things that they have cast us that they can't box us in because we're a beautiful diaspora, man. We have so many different levels and spectrums of us. And it's our job as Black storytellers we have to set the tone for that. We have to establish that foundation and demand of them to step up and do their part. This is a newsroom effort. It's not the African Negroes. It's not just Black people or Asian people or Latino people's job. It's all of our collective job to make sure we're reflecting what's really happening out there in those streets.
And also what makes a good writer, and I always believe this, is a good reader. Like if you read a lot, you can write well. White people need to read Black authors. They need to read Black articles and Black journalists. And oftentimes, a lot of them just don't. Yeah. They don't.
I don't even know Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, man.
I want to get Jamal in here real quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, the very brief thing I have to say is that one of the reasons that we and your Black friends, I'm sure, have been able to recommend you books at this time, right, when everybody kind of wants to know, that's because we read them all. We went and did the research and did the homework and everything too, and obviously we have experiences and we have things to pull on as well. But there was a certain point, especially around our age, where Trayvon Martin was 8 years ago, or Ferguson was now in 2015, I believe, or 2015. So there was a time, or even before that, probably where all of us were woken up and to start doing the work. And I think it should be the same for everybody else. That again, that point again, it's just like in every other beat, when you get thrown onto it. I've seen reporters that have sort of dove into it with books and articles and everything else, and it is sort of just absurd that this is not treated in the same way when it is such an important topic in every beat.
They can speak to their own privilege. They also have an informed opinion on race because they have the white perspective. They can speak about their privilege, and they can challenge their privilege in their reporting and reassess how they can approach stories differently through their white privilege. We all have a role to play here. We shouldn't be able to absolve white people from covering race.
I want to pivot real quick. We're going to get to lots more Facebook questions that keep pouring in, so I'll try to get to them.
We're going to feed the streets.
I'm going to get to these Facebook questions as I can. I do want to pivot here and talk a little bit about our experiences as Black men and what we go through in the industry. In particular, the barriers of entry when it comes to being a Black man in this industry. What are those barriers? Is the journalism industry inviting to Black men? What have you guys encountered? And just rattle off some things, because we all have different stories. What your experience is like just coming up in this industry as a Black man.
What was most difficult for me was figuring out how to bring the fullness of my humanity and my identity to my profession in a way that didn't already write me off. My name is Dometi Pongo. So
say his name. Come on now.
So it's like when I first started in this, it was a real conversation about whether to change my name or not, for it to be more Americanized, to make me more, Larry King actually has a Jewish name. It's not even his name. So it's not uncommon dating back there, so let alone a Black guy. So it was like the fullness of my identity. And then while I was reporting at the same time, even while I was at WGN, I was hosting open mics and I was on the hip hop scene and I was doing things that wouldn't seem becoming of a reporter. I didn't have that veneer, that polish, even though my work did. And so I think that already, I saw that white people got to be the fullness of themselves. I saw that when Brad went on spring break, and he posted those pictures of him on the beach with all of these different women on his Instagram page, it was Brad is just having fun. When I post pictures from the artist lounge, I had to double think about how is this going to make me look in my newsroom? Do I look unprofessional? Am I going to be received differently? And so I really had to work twice as hard to make sure that I earned the right to bring the fullness of my identity into everything that I did. And that's something that took a long time. That was one of the most frustrating things for me.
Charles, I want to get to you too. I want you to chime in because you don't work specifically through traditional media institutions, but you are an outstanding journalist, writer, and advocate for the people what has your journey been like and some of the barriers you've seen as a Black man?
Oh man, like so never went to J school, never went to like any type of media training school. Like, and I didn't want to be a writer at first. I wanted to be a teacher. I majored in African American studies from a predominantly Black college in Chicago, Chicago State University. And so like my start, people have always complimented my writing. Like you can write well, you got to tell stories, you're a good writer. But yeah, I literally had to put my body on the line. Like when I think about my trajectory into the journalism field, my background is community activism and organizing. Like I was waging campaigns, protesting on the street, been arrested, blocked highways, civil disobediences. But what planted that seed to even become involved in the journalism industry, so to speak, is the fact of how we were covered and what was being lost in the media and how protest was criminalized. And how when I pick up a Chicago Sun-Times paper that says, you know, sorry, State University, and it's not written by a Black person, and I'm like, oh, I organized this protest. That didn't happen. Oh, wait, like having that realization, I'm like, the folks on the front lines need to be in relationship with people in the newsrooms, because the corporate lobbyists are like, you know what I'm saying? So like, how do we have a stake in these publications? How is Black resistance covered in a way that is culturally relevant to Black people? And so I decided like I'm going to do whatever it takes to like get our stories out there as authentically as I possibly can, because there's so much that we're missing. So I went through the nonprofit, independent media gamut of like organizations, City Bureau, which taught like people how to be journalists 101, walked you through all types of workshops, did like 2 fellowships there. Then I got with the Chicago Defender based upon like an article I did studying Chicago City Council and what they did in regards to the Laquan McDonald and police reform, how they failed at basically community oversight of the police. But at my time at the Defender, I was primarily like concentrating on telling the stories of Black women, because I felt like the publication wasn't doing enough to talk about our resistance. We got our galas, we got our like, you know, like our parties and our feel good stories. But I'm like, when I was reading the Chicago Defender, looking up Ida B. Wells and Langston Hughes, I'm like, where's the resistance at? Like how are we supposed to know how to fight back if we don't even know who the organizers are in our communities? If no one's in conversation with the organizers in our communities, no one's talking about the tactics used or like how that influences politicians. They don't talk about the Black community is so rich. It's a world in and of itself. You have Black liberals over here talking, and you got the Black socialists over here and like with the liberals, and there needs to be Black people to articulate that to our people. So we will be informed when it comes to things like voting, when it comes to things like pushing for legislation, when it comes to things, we need to know like who are the thought leaders in our community, because right now we just turn into like a rapper, you know what I'm saying, or a singer. So that was my ideas, like how do we get back to real community journalism? And I'm like I said, African American studies major, so I'm reading the Black Panther newspaper and how unapologetic they are, calling the police pigs in their newspaper, and this their own media, you know? And I'm thinking like, man, if we could be that courageous and talk how we want to talk when we want to talk it, and still convey a truth to our people to get them to mobilize and revolutionize for our people. There needs to be people like that in newsrooms, you know?
Jamal, barriers you've seen working your way up to Tribune.
Oh, yeah. Man, I think about, the first thing I'm thinking about is just the barriers to even get started in journalism. I mean, you think about the internships that often are not paying very much or unpaid or whatever, and that sort of only, you know, opens it up to a certain amount of people who have a certain amount of privilege. And, you know, then from there, and when usually, like you said, you get to often, if you have to start at a small market or even just a smaller paper, that you're probably not getting paid very much. You're hearing constantly why these stories that you want to do don't matter, or you can't do them, or you don't have supportive editors or don't have Black people around. I used to cover baseball before coming to the Tribune and covered it in DC. But I saw a lot of young baseball, young people in baseball, or just people in baseball that were getting into it, that were starting out on beats and did not feel, obviously into the clubhouses there, which are majority white, and just the game and the way the culture is there, but just on beats that they were in, and the other writers and the other reporters and other places, they just didn't really feel supported in being Black. And some of them stayed in the baseball writing track, and a lot of them, or a few of them, definitely kind of went out of it. I think that I remember I was just feeling really just disheartened by that, by hearing how often that story was told about somebody who was Black that started on the beat and didn't last very long, for kind of a number of reasons. So I just think that all of those, it was the first thing to think about to me, is how you can just feel very unsupported when you're not, again, you're not making a whole lot of money. You may have just started out in this thing. It's a hard industry in general. And then you sort of get all those things thrown into you, and it is, you want to speak up for yourself and maybe write these things, but again, we know job market's trash, and the realities of business are what they are too. So it's harder. It's kind of hard to make noise and waves with that. So I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that's all the things that I
you got it.
that I first thought about. Go ahead.
We've been there too.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what I just first think about when I think about the ways that this industry has become an industry of comes from people that make it in this industry often come from some kind of privilege, and it is a lot easier to get started and maybe go through the bumps that you have to, or often have to, at the beginning of it, before you get to a space where maybe your voice is able to be heard a little bit more.
Kind of to chime in here, Jamal, what you were saying, I feel you, because the barriers are tough. Unpaid internships, to have so much time dedicated to something and not get paid for it is difficult for a lot of people, but especially when your mom can't give you no money. You need a job, it's very challenging. And so that's the thing I get concerned about a lot, is that, are we upholding this being only a profession for the elites?
Yes, we are.
Torrance? Yeah.
I mean, my journey was unique, man. I went to grad school. So first, let me say this. I went to an HBCU. So Southern University, shout out to them. Best marching band in the universe. But, I think Southern gave me so much confidence when I left. Like, the way I found my Blackness going to a HBCU. And I was comfortable in that when I left it. So there was no misconception about, I was very intentional. Once I left Southern, I knew what I was going after, and I knew why I was going after. Why? Because I knew who I was. I did the research and I learned my history. Then I knew I was standing on the shoulders of the Ida B. Wellses, the people who covered lynching back in the day. So how can I not step in these? I don't care if it's white spaces or not. How can I not ride out and be who I am? Good things come to those who stay true. And I want I'm really speaking to the younger journalists who are just about to come out, because I had imposter before I got into these spaces. I didn't feel like I knew enough. I didn't feel like I was adequate in my expertise to really bring something to the table. Bump that. They need you in them. You are the essential worker in that newsroom. Can't nobody tell these stories better than you. You got to come with that mentality. I got that from going to the HBCU that I went to. And I'm gonna get back to your question, because honestly, I want to reframe that. I don't feel like I had a barrier, because I feel like all of my barriers were mental. I don't feel like there's anything any of those news organizations can do to prevent me from going to my destiny. I'm purpose driven. My purpose is gonna be my purpose at AP or without it. AP, appreciate them checks, keep them rolling. but your boy is gonna be good either way, because we bring this to the table. We run this. We are the culture. We the people. And we got to be confident in who we are. Can't nobody block you out of something that God has destined for you. And we got to emphasize, like, I don't want us to necessarily focus, like, obviously these disparities are disgusting, but we also need to present solutions to these young people. We can't just point out what the problems are and the lack. We obviously know the lack of access there. They don't want us to access in really any space. If frankly, we got to push through those doors. And when you do get that opportunity, you better ride out. You better represent like you ain't never represented before, because who knows, they might not hire another black person behind you. You don't know if you might die today as a black man. You have to be that purposeful in your day-to-day and how you deliver. They hired you for that authenticity. You need to bring that 100%. Don't ever fold your voice. They need that from you. And if you don't do it, the journalism itself will be neglected from you.
Torrance did a great job, brother, bringing that home, because I do want to give us a chance to do exactly what the hashtag says, inspire black men. I know there's a lot of young brothers who are on this feed right now who are looking for some guidance and some sort of advice from some people that are making it and who are in a position that they want to be in one day. So I want you guys to go around, give some advice to some young brothers out there. What can they do? How do they get through this? What would you say?
Man, Torrance sparked on something I'm really passionate about. And my biggest piece of advice is know what advice not to listen to.
Woo!
That is my largest piece of advice, because so many of the barriers that we have in place, like Torrance said, are self-imposed. You know, the other end of what I was talking about communicating the fullness of my identity, you know, in my newsroom and all of that, a part of it was real. A part of it was, you know, some colleagues might look at me funny, et cetera, et cetera. But largely it was self-imposed, because at the end of the day, I got that job at WGN or whatever platform it was because of the fullness of my personality, because of who I was in the community, in addition to how good of a journalist I was. I was probably a better, you know, community partner and advocate than I was a journalist at that time. And so, and the reason why I say know what advice not to listen to is because so many people, even black mentors who meant well, told me that in order for me to get to the next level, I would have to leave Chicago, go to smaller markets, and work my way back up. That is the truth for a lot of people. It's not the truth for everyone. I went from Market 3 to Market 1. I'm in Brooklyn now. I'm in New York now, in Times Square, Viacom, CBS. If I would have listened to those people, I wouldn't even have gone for those opportunities. You know, so stop cutting the next generation off at the knees. We're doing the work we're doing so that they don't have to go to some podunk town and deal with racism if they don't want to. They can go to other places. They can go from Market 3 and move up and go to DC and go to Atlanta and find a different way to navigate this whole thing.
I'm a testament to it. Market 96 to Market 3.
Come on.
You don't have to go. You don't got to do the traditional route. Not everybody has to follow the same path. Everybody.
Nah. I went from radio to linear. You know what I'm saying? Black-owned radio to mainstream linear. It can happen. And I think, and to make it more tangible, just so it's not like this, you can do it and it's like this nebulous thing. One of the main things I did was I found ways to command multiple spaces at once. I did panels like this one so that brothers I respect knew my name. I was locked in with NABJ. I hosted galas. And so people in the audiences at those galas who I didn't even know who they were would reach out 6 months later with opportunities to create, you know, more chances for me to host and do. I built podcasts for nonprofit organizations. So there are different things that we can do with new media, with multimedia that can push your brand forward. And we can tell stories outside of the outlets that we work for. And other markets are paying attention to what you're doing right now, even in those spaces.
Black men and women, whoever is listening, we are our own brands. Wherever you go, treat yourself like the business you are. We are a business, man. You feel me? Like, you have to take that kind of mentality. We can't be so committed to these corporations and have this kind of blind allegiance and loyalty, because they'll chew you up and spit you out. They'll extract the nutrients of all the good that you can do. And once they feel like you have no use, they'll discard you and get the next one. You have to take life into your own hands. Don't be reactive, be proactive. Take the world by storm. And if they don't give you what you need and you don't feel like you're going and developing, have those conversations with other people, other news organizations. Redirect that energy elsewhere. Never feel like you have to stay complacency and under the thumb of white people or white supremacy. We're kings, and we have to, it's our job to encourage one another, still sharpen steel. We have to really spark that change and inspire one another to tap into our inner kings so we can go out and be the greatest people that we were always destined to be. This country has taught us to be subservient. We have to unlearn all of that nonsense and then kind of reframe and reshape our own narrative and have that imagination and creativity to think about the possibilities of what we could be. Because I'll be damned if I'm gonna have these same conversations today in 2030 and 2040 with my children. I'm not putting in this work right now, risking my job talking this flavor as I'm talking. So for my little girl to have to fight through the same hurdles 10, 20 years from now. This is the revolution starts right now, and it starts with each of us and holding each other accountable and inspiring each other.
Definitely. Jamal, Charles, I'm going to ask you to keep your responses quick because I do want to get to our Facebook questions as well.
Charles,
I'll go. Yeah, most definitely everything that was just said. Relationships. Like, I would not be here if it wasn't for Rashida Cox denying a job at Injustice Watch, saying Charles Preston would do this job way better than I can. Wouldn't have been at the Chicago Defender if Jennifer Casas wasn't at the table with the editor and said, like, well, Charles writes great and can, like, people will push for you when they see the quality of your work. So, like, if your work is about Black people, put some love into that. Make sure you're talented at what you do. And really nurture those relationships. Also, be experimental as you can be. Like Domity said, there is no correct lane to go. So whatever you have to do, if it's starting your YouTube channel, going on Medium, really investing in yourself and making yourself like that person, that brand, that person, or whatever. If the work is good, it will get attention. Nurture those relationships once they get attention and capitalize off of that. So,
yeah, real quick. I mean, that's sort of what I was kind of going for as well. It's just like that is one of the advantages of this kind of the internet and everything right now is if you got ideas, you got things to say, you got whatever, you can just go start doing it. And you can just start putting it on YouTube, creating your podcast, doing whatever. And people love Black ideas and Black culture and stuff like that. So, I think that's one of the advantages here is that go out, start producing it, and even if nobody's watching and nobody's listening yet, you start to do that and figure out and try new things and push the envelope, and not necessarily trying to sound how they sound in the New York Times that you think what it's supposed to be, but think of how you think the story should be told or what angles you think it should be. Reading the New York Times or reading other, not even New York Times, just other journalistic publications to know maybe what things you like, what voices you want, what things you maybe want to mimic, and I think that reading is important, but you don't have to sound like they may do on TV or whatever, and just to sort of make it. I think that's a really good point that you brought up. Like, go out and try stuff and see what it sounds like.
The B-Poe, before I know you about to pivot back to the Facebook streets, right? But look, we all like hip hop, right? We hustlers at heart, man. We hustlers. At the end of the day, we gonna hustle to go get ours, right? By any means necessary, you're gonna do what you gotta do.
Yeah.
I looked up to I'm from Louisiana. I looked up to Master P's and the J Princes.
Mm-hmm.
I respect the movement Nipsey had where he was willing to forego establishment to create his own thing and build slowly. Be the slow burn. You don't necessarily have to be viral. You want to last forever. You want your legacy to be cemented. You don't want to be that one hit wonder, man. You want to have that to pimp a butterfly. But in order to do that,
talk that talk.
But let's keep it all the way 100. Y'all told me I could cook, so I'm finna cook. BRT in that thing, you dig?
He cooking.
The fact is, we gotta hustle, man, and I want the youngins to know you gotta hustle for this. They're not gonna give you anything. You take it, and you take it, and you run with it. And once you do run with it, and you get the goal, reach back your hand, and then reach out to the next generation, and let them go even farther than where you took it. Now, B-Pope, let's go feed the street.
Man. You set it off. I love it. I also want to say, set the vision in your mind. I mean, you have to have the vision in your head and keep it there. Always have your eyes on the prize. And don't let anybody tell you can't make it. I've had tons of no's, tons of people saying I'm not the right fit to be an on-air person. I'm not the right fit to anchor a show. I don't have the presentation, the look, the voice, or whatever. Don't take that stuff for an answer. You gotta
that beard flourishing. They don't know nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
What I'm saying, man.
What you say? Market 96 to number 3?
What?
Yeah.
Now.
Jump 93 spots, boy.
All the way
they didn't want them.
But you said it. You said it. We internalize so much of the bad advice that we're given.
We gotta dismantle that, man. I never want us to ever have that kind of defeatist mentality. We kings, and we gotta speak the king and queens into each other.
100%. Okay, guys, I want to give people time to chime in with their questions on Facebook. I'm getting some right now, Twitter, Facebook, email. I'm trying to manage them all. I'm going to try to get to as many as possible, but I also want us to be out of here by 3:30. They are wide ranging, so if they seem random, they're still all good. Just bear with me here, okay? This one is more of a general question about what we're going through right now in our communities all across America. And I'm gonna try to tailor the question a little bit. How do you guys feel about the rioting and looting in the city of Chicago? I think the better way to look at this is, how do you look at the coverage of that? I know me personally, I don't like the word looting. What are y'all's takes on the coverage of the protests, riots, and quote unquote looting?
Oh man, that's loaded.
Charles tried to wait. You know we were waiting on you. I was gonna let you open it up. No, we're waiting on Charles.
Man, it's loaded. And historically, protests, riots, loot, like it's never been covered accurately. Like never been covered accurately. And I think with the coverage that is going on, they're really criminalizing Black people with their like most outlets are criminalizing Black people with their coverage. They're not telling full stories about like the state of our communities before the riots and the protests, pre-pandemic, then once the pandemic hit, and then once this explosive, fiery nature of people raiding downtown and stores, they're not telling a comprehensive look at it. And so it's really, really, really easy to blame Black people right now for the state of Chicago, when Black people in Chicago has always had it rough. Like that's been the story of Chicago for as long as we can. There's no comparison to this riot and the 1968 riots. There's no political analysis of like naturally what happens when you shut down downtown and people retreat back to their communities with this fiery rage. You know, the brown people in the brown communities, Black people in the Black communities, it's going to combust, you know, and then also the angles in which we're telling stories, right? There's a preoccupation with businesses, and they do that to, in my opinion, to criminalize Black people, to be like, you all looted your own neighborhood, shame on you, rather than let's talk about the folks who were at the bottom of the barrel before this thing started and their thoughts and why are they taking things. I was out on 47th Street as a looting just occurred. People grabbing 20 pairs of jeans.
Allegedly.
But
to sell. Like people are dealing with poverty. And
that's my thing. Imagine talking about looting with 15 million people are unemployed. I just can't.
And let me talk about this too. One thing we forget when it comes to rioting and looting and the way those stories are covered is that we never contextualize why these people feel like they're unheard. Everyone loves using the Martin Luther King phrase, why is some language of unheard? Why do people feel unheard? Why have they resulted to it? And then what historically has been the response to looting? Because like, I don't think we would have gotten the convictions of those other officers involved in George Floyd's death if the whole world was on fire. Yeah. I don't think there's a protest that is going to be convenient. A peaceful protest was Colin Kaepernick kneeling. People criticized.
They didn't like that. Yep.
They didn't like that. Peaceful protest is marching when people were blocking traffic. Folks don't like being inconvenienced. The most peaceful protests I've seen have been the most ineffective. Unfortunately, I've seen protests where, and we talked about this in our pre-call yesterday, just off the record, but I've seen protests before where the organizers were in conversation with police who told them what street they could march down. And it's the most amenable protest ever, but it's not a protest, it's a parade. Protests are supposed to be uncomfortable in order to spark conversation. And there's lack of, in the reporting of rioting and looting, there's a lack of nuance in the fact that multiple things are happening. Protests are happening. people who are activists and organizers have participated in the destruction of property. People who do not care about the movement have participated in the destruction of property. Asian provocateurs have participated in the destruction of property. People who support the president have participated in the destruction of property to make the Black Lives Matter movement look bad.
The police?
All of the police have aided in that. And so all of these things can be true at once. And I think that we've been conditioned by national media to look for a clear narrative. Mm-hmm. All of these things are happening at the same time. And that is what's missing out of these conversations in this coverage.
That's on point. It's always Black protests and Black people being told in a singular narrative. Right. That's the point. There are groups on the ground, organizers on the ground who are in conflict with each other right now. Right. And that's not being reported out to the news. Thank you.
And again, just really quick to jump in also is that, a man is dead. People are dead. And, these buildings that are getting burned and whatever can be rebuilt. Things can be replaced. These billionaires have all been making more money during this pandemic. Everybody else losing their money. So again, it's such a thing. I don't like the word looting. And it's just a word that I'm so not interested in that conversation with people anymore, because I just don't care. There's other bigger things and reforms and things we got to do. So if you're worried about these buildings when people are dead and can't come back from, and these buildings can be rebuilt, again, it's the thing that I'm just not interested in talking about.
I've never had really quick. It's gonna be 3 seconds, real quick. I've never heard real conversations about defund the police until after this moment, and I think it's because America is on fire. So
yeah, I appreciate your video too, breaking down the defund the police movement. I think a lot of people don't understand what that means. I had to look it up myself when I first saw it become a thing years ago. Defund the police. It's such a thing you don't really think about, but once you break down and hear different sides of perspectives and what the actual concern is, you start to have a better understanding of what people are calling for, and it's really just resources.
But B Pope, let me ask you this though, man. I'm sorry, but
people over the tables, I like it.
But this is the thing though. From my perception, why do you have this so much energy for buildings and materialism as opposed to Black bodies?
Right.
So when these Black bodies are laid out on the pavement for minutes on end, blood seeping out of them, why don't you have that same concern as you do for the Nike store downtown? Mm-hmm. And look, and I'm gonna bring back hip hop one more time, but on Birdman to Pimp a Butterfly, eventually the people on the ground gonna eat the rich. And I think you don't get to tell people who have been under the thumb and foot of oppression for centuries how they should they get to be raised how they want to be raised. Unless you're trying to promote equality, give people an opportunity financially to take care of themselves and have a better quality life, sit this one out and listen to the people who have been doing this work and have been about that work.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm sorry to cut you guys off. I got to move us along to another Facebook comment here. Lots of great comments and questions. Karishma is asking, is there anything you'd like to see covered more regarding the Black community?
I think the fullness of us should be covered. I think we're not a monolith. We don't think one way. Like to what Charles said earlier, man, there's conservatives, there's liberals, there's some in between. There's people struggling to find their identity. We're like a huge spectrum across the board, and we need to tap into all of those things. We need to talk about the education aspect. We need to talk about the technological aspect. We need to talk about, even in sports, there are nuances to sports that we could tackle, and we should grapple. I know Jamal's doing great work among many other sports journalists, but we have to capture the fullness of what Black looks like. We have to we're protesters and looters. They said, look, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, they said that. I saw human beings. I saw my aunties, uncles, cousins, and friends and family members there. I don't look at them as thugs. You know what I mean? We have to dismantle those things to humanize. We are human beings, man. Those protesters are human. Hey, look, we got this. AP has a joint dropping next week where we're humanizing the protesters. Over 10,000 protesters have been arrested. Who are they though? Why are they protesting? How have we gotten to this point? Are we going to skip all over the systemic inequalities that are perpetuated from generation to generation to just holler at them yelling with their pitchforks outside? To me, that's a very narrow-minded view that allows them an avenue to kind of escape, to not be responsible for where we are today in society.
So I think Black resistance, what are we fighting for? Who's doing the fighting? on the local and national level, because again, there's singular narratives, thinking like all black people are Democrats, all black people are liberals, and this is the one thing that we're voting on and fighting for, when it's so much richer than that. I think black LGBTQ issues, most definitely. There's a world in all of its own. I'm not seeing enough like hip hop media cover black LGBTQ artists. Like I'm not seeing it, and there's a rich community of that. And even with issues of policing, like we're just covering death. Right. We're not covering civil asset forfeiture, like police actually taking people's things and theft. We're not covering sexual assault by police officers to black women. There's a gamut of like, I think there's so much to cover, and also like the youth, like we need to know more about like the youth, and also like youth and technology. The other day, I'm talking to folks 6 years younger than me. Some of them saying they've been on the internet since the age of 5. Yeah. And I'm like, that's something I don't know about. I got on the internet like around 11, 12 years old, but they are literally
dialing up, weren't you?
Yeah, dialing up. Like you couldn't call through, couldn't call the house phone while he was dialing up. Phone, yep. You know what I'm saying? So like we have an entire generation, Gen Z, of folks who have a different relationship to technology and internet and those spaces that we do. Like the alt-right popping up was like, you know, a new thing for like a lot of black middle-aged folks and a lot of black millennials. But a lot of Gen Z folks, like, we saw this coming like a long time ago. We in these spaces. We seen this all online all the time. So like, I think, youth, LGBTQ issues, how we talk about policing and black resistance and our politics.
Real quick, I was gonna say the victimization of black women. I wish that was covered a little bit more. Like the Rakia Boyd story felt big in Chicago. I didn't realize it wasn't as big nationally. Breonna Taylor's story is starting to get more voice, but I wish more of that was covered. And then I wish more fringe black movements were covered the same way we cover fringe alt-right movements. Yes. Like I remember when the idea of abolish the police first came up like 5 years ago, around the Laquan time, or whoever, you know, whatever atrocity had happened at that time. I'm thinking 2015.
Laquan, it was Laquan.
Okay, that was the first time I heard that rhetoric. And I remember running the soundbite on it, you know, live on the radio at the station I was working at the time. And I remember the other news anchors looking because it's live radio, you know, I'll have an editor, you know, I'm just going, they were like, did he really just run a soundbite from, you know, an activist talking about abolishing the police, and it sounded so foreign. 5 years later, even in the piece where I say defund the police, where I talked to Dr. Armin Henderson, I had done a piece where Dr. Armin Henderson was somebody who was volunteering in Miami to feed the homeless. He's a doctor. He had on a face mask, but the police gave him a citation because they thought he was covering his face. Some shit, but police were just messing with him. Right. You know what I'm saying? Make a long story short, excuse my language. And so I remember he said, we need to imagine a world without police. And that soundbite was excluded from the piece. Now that this has become a popular conversation, we're able to add that soundbite in and do a full story about it. Why was it that it wasn't appropriate back then? Because it seems so far gone. Because Black fringe movements aren't reported on the same way we report on white fringe movements. And so whether an idea is viable or not, objective journalism means all of them deserve coverage.
Talk about it.
But like also, I think mental health. You know the PTSD and trauma that Black people have faced. How we should be. That should be a whole series. That everybody should be unpacking the trauma that Black people have faced in this country. What does mental health look like for an 8-year-old who doesn't know he's going to eat tomorrow? You know what I mean? We're so focused that the school to prison pipeline. How does that affect the psyche of young Black males and young Black girls who probably, and let's be all the way 100. I know quite a few Black women and young girls who have been molested, assaulted by their family members. Mental health is everything for us. We have to destigmatize all of these things. As a Black man, if I showed emotion growing up, you soft. We have to unpack that. That's not the healthy way for us to be in 2020. Those things will kill us. It's why we have high blood pressure, diabetes, and all of those. And other than the food deserts and the garbage food that they put in our grocery stores, the stress and the anxiety and the anguish that we feel just existing, because everywhere we go, we feel like there's a target on us. We can't even just be who we are. That is traumatic in itself. We need to unpack mental health in a major way.
100%. I want to move on to another Facebook question here from Laura Rodriguez Presa from Chicago Tribune and NAHJ. She asks, how can brown journalists address the anti-blackness and cover the movement better? This is especially timely given the report we've seen at a little village in Pilsen of attacks on Black Chicagoans, and there's been long tensions between the Black and brown communities. How can brown journalists, Latino journalists, better cover that anti-blackness in particular?
Establishing relationships with Black organizers and Black people on the ground. Like, as far as I know, the fringe folks that Domitty's speaking of, like the abolitionists, some of them are the most caring people in the world, the most compassionate people in the world, because they believe in the world without police. And that world means that, like, they are the ones that will have to carry the burdens and the traumas and the social issues that we've relegated towards the police departments. They believe in a world where community is responsible for that. And so I think it's incumbent, like, on anyone covering race and anyone covering our issues and protests, especially, for those folks to tap in with folks leading the protest and folks who are behind or pushing those abolitionist thoughts, defund the police rhetoric. Like, you have to tap in with those folks and they'll get you right. And not just for a story, tap into them on the off time. Ask for some reading material. You know what I'm saying? Like, also, like, establish relationships with Black journalists that are doing it right. You know, so like we can be guides and sources and steer you into the right direction. And then I think there are some Latino journalists who are doing it right. You know, tap in with them as well. But, like, folks have to want to learn. Folks have to be able to receive. Like, if you're not able to receive and be able to be critiqued and be willing to change, then you're not going to change. One example is one of my former co-workers, Abby Blackman, did a article on police torture in Chicago, torture victims and whatnot. And white woman, one of the torture survivors, called her up and said, like, I don't like the use of the word allegedly. This thing really did happen. But she was so receptive to that. Like, she went and told her editors, emailed like Mark Clements back, because that was who made the complaint, emailed him back, and was really like establishing a relationship, telling her relationship as like, she just want to know. Being able to receive knowledge, being that humble. I think a lot of journalists and writers have this ego thing about them where their pen is like the liberatory force of like what is going to happen, or their voice is. And I'm like, nah, like we have to be receptive. You just got to be receptive.
Got to have the conversation. We had a great panel on the Jam, the platform that I'm on, where we actually unpack the issue. I think the big first step you have to do is like admit there's a problem there. Admit that there is anti-blackness that needs to be within the Latino community. I think that's huge. Another question here that I want to get us to. This one's actually interesting. It's from news director in Milwaukee over at the CBS station out there. He says, he's a Black man. What advice do you have for old brothers like me running newsrooms with only 3 Black employees?
I can't even... I haven't even been in that position. I can't even approach that, but I can tell you what I've observed that worked well. And I have a Black VP at MTV News who allows me to tell, I don't even know the fights that he's having that allows me to say some of the things that I've been able to say on that platform. Like, you know, I don't talk about it publicly except for in forums or like this, but I've said some things that I know I wouldn't be able to say in other time periods. And so, giving advice to him, I would say making sure those Black journalists that do work for you feel uber supported. And when they're not doing stories about race, making sure that you champion their skills and you help them hone their skills in a way such that when a time like this comes, they can rise to the occasion and they don't deal with that with those microaggressions as vehemently from their colleagues if they know that that person is a respected journalist, regardless of color, where they are. And I think that that was one of the, as I shifted throughout my career, what has helped me is I've been blessed with news directors that have communicated my value and efficacy to my colleagues in a way that when I feel confronted with resistance, they got to confront the news director too, because they're like, oh, Domateef knows what he's talking about. So make sure if you got to complain about how he did a story, it's got to be buttoned up. And so making sure the people that work for you feel supported really goes a long way.
In a couple on that, man, you know, take them under your wing and show them, give them the executive, the boss lens. I think we need to have a pipeline created. I think there's not enough of any of us in these executive C-suite spaces. How do you get there though? I think we need to really, mentorship is everything. Go take them to coffee, to lunch, see where their interests are and see how you can cultivate. It's like a head coach. Cultivate them, meet them at their skill set, where they are, help grow and build them gradually. Eventually, maybe they can replace you or take over the whole damn station. But we have to create that kind of pipeline, man. You might be the last news director they get that's black in local news. Like, let's keep it all the way real. How many black news directors are there? I didn't know any, and through my navigation through local news. So the fact that you're in that position, man, you the one. You're the one, man. And I would say weaponize that for the good. Show them what it's like to be a boss, and then I think they too will become bosses one day.
You know what? Great coaches develop talent.
I think so.
You can't just be a figurehead. You gotta cultivate the talent you have. I think this. We're gonna take one more Facebook question. I think this one everyone can chime in on it. It ties in pretty well. Karishma, she asks, how do you recommend reporters handle racist comments or microaggressions in newsrooms, keeping in mind that it is often brushed under the rug or the reporter faces retaliation? Woo!
You better speak on it, sister.
Come on now. Come on. Woo! Who wants to?
I want to know y'all answer, because I'm trying to figure that out.
I am too.
Jamal been quiet. I'm gonna let Mr. Kyle.
Yeah, I was gonna say I want to hear from Jamal, man.
Jamal,
I think I know what I want to say, but I'm
No. Look, I'm in the same boat, man. Like, that is something I am not in newsrooms a lot, just because of the sports. I'm at the stadium. I'm at locker rooms, and especially thinking about I used to cover baseball. And those locker rooms, those press boxes, those spaces are not are majority white, and usually I am the only black person that is around within within miles of the place. So yeah, I mean, that is how to deal with it. I mean, this is in a lot of ways where also this is where white people need to also step up here, is that, a lot of people that are comfortable saying these things in these spaces and whatever, and you, the allies or whatever, are not challenging these things, or making them, of course, we're creating an environment where they feel comfortable speaking out on that, or putting you and making you feel that situation. That is, I think, first off, the first thing that I want to get to white people, in that, in these moments and these times when it's in the news and racism is such the big story, that it can be, and you're an ally and everything, that's amazing. It's great. But it's in those also moments where these are things that your black colleagues and friends are dealing with every day. And it happens all the time. And when are other people going to have to step in? Because that is a tiring thing. And for all the things we just talked about, when you feel like you are just starting, or whatever it might be, whatever kind of position that's sort of kind of shaky, whatever position you may think you are, a reporter, just whatever, when you're a black reporter out there and there's not very many of you, or there's not very many of you in the newsroom, it's hard to have that battle every single time and to get angry every single time when nobody's listening and the same thing is happening. So, I mean, that is, I think that's the first thing is I can just go to. I'm struggling again with myself of how appropriately to react in those times. But this is also where, hey, if all the white allies or whatever that are activated in this moment, we need you to be activated in every moment. We need you to start challenging people that make your colleagues and friends feel this way all the time.
I usually don't tout this book because some elements of it are problematic, but in this area, the book 48 Laws of Power has really helped me, because it helped me to figure out how to navigate relationships. And I've been somewhat a politician throughout my career. One of the things that helps me with microaggressions is creating friends outside of the immediate newsroom that I'm working with, so that when those white folks are, if they find themselves in a position where they're speaking ill on my name, someone else is at the table who can defend me. Because I built a relationship with Bob over in accounting, who I had coffee with, who I know is cool with the news director, who I know is cool with. And so you got to kind of forge relationships. And it's hard too, because it's hard enough being sociable with coworkers, let alone white coworkers who have microaggressions. But if you can find some commonality to create relationships on whatever y'all connect with, we both watch basketball, we both love the Last Dance documentary, we both play chess. I'm playing chess with those white guys at work that I know are strategically cool with the people I need them to be cool with, so that when those microaggressions happen, I have an ally. And then also,
it's mental chess too. You playing over here too, not checkers.
Oh yeah, oh man,
that's a game.
I'm telling you, it's a whole. I damn near got a flow chart in my mind on how to. I need to
whole. You see that Galaxy Brain meme where he's like, yeah.
If we had more time, I would tell the story of, and B Pope was there, Charles was there at the premiere party for True Life Crime. Yeah. And the amount of behind the scenes I had to maneuver to make that happen, that's the story for another panel. But I think those relationships, navigating those relationships with allies and trying to find commonality in that way, and then picking your battles, because microaggressions are what they are, because they're able to do something so subversive that you sound crazy if you bring it up. Like, you sound crazy like, yo, you know, the copy editor is always correcting this piece of my story, but when I've seen them work with Sally, they don't do this the same way. And it's so particular and minute that it's so hard to prove. And I still don't know how to navigate that, but I do know that I keep receipts, screenshots, and emails, so that when it's time for me, when I have the moment where it makes sense to bring it up, I'm gonna bring it up. One thing that has helped me, I know I'm giving a long answer, but one more thing is coming.
That's a great answer.
I work with I want to tell this story in truth, but then I'm realizing we're in a public forum. I had a position where I worked with a Black woman who was experiencing microaggressions from someone else. And as the host of the show, I had a bit of an agency to kind of step in. So when a situation arose that reminded me of a microaggression I experienced from that same person, I stepped in and told my manager, yo, from the outside looking in, it seems like this person is being managed more closely than it was with so-and-so when they made a similar mistake. I was like, and I showed the screenshot. This person made a mistake on scripting this day, and she wasn't reprimanded. I remember when this other person started this job, this happened. In order for us to get better, I'm gonna need that person's performance to be better. Like, it's hard to tell a story without saying names. But so sometimes fighting those microaggressions might mean standing up for other people so that you're not the person who's doing it. But in calling that behavior out, I was actually also serving myself in that y'all be doing that to me too. And I see it. But I'm gonna speak for this person. She didn't ask me to say this, but I noticed this and it made me uncomfortable.
You know, I really respect the fact that it's hard to communicate it, because it is really a game. It's a mental game. It's not an exact science at all to it. And honestly, part of my advice is just excel through it. Your best response to that can just be being dope, being what you're doing.
But look,
you know, unapologetically, you know, no matter what they throw at you, stay mad, stay salty. But I'm still here.
Get to know your HR people too, though. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. Know your human resources person. That should be your best friend in the newsroom. Because when it hits the fan and Karen go make that little Karen call, if you know, you need somebody in HR who can ride for you. That's just being straight up. And another thing, an OG, I can't say his name, but an OG once told me, you gotta weaponize when you use your black card. You know what I mean? I can't say the word I want to say. I'm gonna say black card. You let these, number one, keep a CVS receipt worth of Slack messages, emails. Don't lose Nathan to what my man was just saying earlier. Like, you have to keep these receipts, because in the moment you do need to, hey, look, can we go meet in this office for just a second, away from the cameras and the recorded lines and the people in the newsroom? Then you can be real blunt in how you feel about said actions, and they might want to go carrying that thing to HR. You gotta have your backing, man. And it's like, that's the chance. You really have to play that game. Because it's almost like a survival of the fittest mentality. If you don't adapt to that environment, they'll chew you up and spit you out. But we've always been conditioned to be smarter than them and smarter than that. And we can never let any of those isms affect what we do. If the fact that we even made it out of our environments to get here shows our resiliency. You really think I'm gonna let you push me out of this newsroom at AP?
Right. and believe this, like, yes, it's a game, and it's a shame that we do have to play this game. It's a shame that the game exists, but we also owe it to the people who came before us that had to deal with all that crap, that had to, like, couldn't say a thing. HR department where, you know, we've had Black women have to deal with, like, misogynoir, like, in the workplace of, like, you know, not only what you said was racist, but the way you're acting is also sexist as well. So, like, we have to really be outspoken when these things happen, and do that strategically, like Don Matisse said. We have to become prepared for war. We have to have our allies on our side. We have to have our evidence, our records, and everything, and not necessarily, like, be caught up in the fact that, like, oh, this horrible thing has just happened to me. But mainly reprogram your mind and think, like, oh, this is our fight. This is what the ancestors were talking about. I got people behind me that couldn't do this battle, but right now I'm right here in this position, and I can say something that can change journalism forever in this building, in this newsroom, where it won't happen again. And so we have to think about, like, the future people, you know, coming in after us, so they won't have to endure these microaggressions that we're speaking about.
And look, let's say I do that thing that gets me up out of there. Well, at least you have once met the real thing here. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, man, because it's so tough, we have to make these economical, financial decisions because we just one generation or two away from that abject poverty, man. Like, my grandmother had 7 children, worked 3 jobs. That's not lost on me, as I want to snap on this person for telling me something she knows she ain't got no business telling me. But I have to take that, compartmentalize it, much like I do these killings that I have to cover every day, just so I can do what I need to do. But in that, I think there is strength. You find your Black therapist, or whatever color, you find a therapist, and you release all of those negative energies and urges, and you release that. So you could come back every day renewed and fresh. But never let them trick you out of your position. We were supposed to be here, we're gonna stay here, and then after that, the next generation gonna do the same thing. But we have to set that tone while we in these buildings. Don't run from that, lean into it.
Hey guys, I want to tie this up real quick. Quick responses here. Final question. I think it's a good way to kind of put a bow on this, because we could go on for hours. We're having a really
I think the streets like this right now.
They do. I mean, look at the numbers. We're doing pretty good. We're going to wrap it up with this final point. So what should both Black men and their allies, where do they go from here? What is the next step after this virtual panel we have here?
I'll start. I think, and I've been talking about this a lot, I think it's real. Did you guys see this? Y'all heard of this actress named Leah Michele? I hadn't.
Oh, yeah, from Glee.
This week.
Yeah.
She was one of them. Dish you?
Yeah.
So my favorite tweet reply, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So for those that don't know, she's an actress on Glee, and she tweeted Black Lives Matter. And her Black colleague was like, "Are you serious? You made life a living hell for me."
It's Black than one.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that I think folks can do is, rather than think about these grandiose, esoteric things about dismantling structural racism, start first within your community and think about, are you treating the Black folks you know and work with the respect due to them? Like that. I don't care if you march or protest if you being Karen at work. You know, it's asinine. So that's the main thing. So, like, on one-to-one contact, that's one. And then the second thing, and I'll let everybody get to the more, like, robust things that folks can do. But the second thing is having them figure out the ways in which they're weaponizing their privilege. And they might not even realize it. That when you tell the manager about something that happened in the workplace on this African-American, how it translates differently than it does in any other conversation. And your colorblindness is literally killing people. You so colorblind that you didn't know that calling the police on this person would have that consequence. You know, so I think in that same way, making sure that they're in their one-to-one connection with Black folks are being cognizant of their privilege and of their tone deafness.
Yeah, man. I mean, that is kind of what I've been thinking about a lot of, and I'm thinking more on the quote unquote ally side of this is that, like, you know, again, in this moment when it is right in your face and it's all over the news and racism is there, it's very easy to put your Black square on Instagram and to, you know, really be a champion for Black Lives Matter right now. But this is a long haul. You know, this is a fight that we get every single day, and it is such an active thing that, you know, you need to be practicing and thinking about every day. And, you know, I don't remember exactly what I heard, but all the I think, you know, those White Fragility was like the #1 book on Amazon or something recent. And something, I forget where I read this, but somebody's like, they're coming for a test. it's coming up soon. And it sort of feels like everybody's like, we got to start reading it right now because, you know, we're going to be quizzed in a couple of weeks. And it's just like, you know, again, it is very nice that in this moment, everybody is just, for a lot of people, I should say, are feeling like they are trying to help and do something, but we need that energy. We need that every day. And I guess the same I would say with Black people too. It's just to know, and as tiring as it is, that this is a sort of a constant thing and a constant way to be kind of thinking about and to be, you know, sort of I can't think of a good word here, but just to be always engaging with, I guess, in your mind. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm thinking about the most. It's just like, you know, hey, congrats, y'all. You know, welcome to the revolution. Now, where you been? But also,
welcome to the cookout. That's what the cookout is like sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. But,
this is the cookout. Surprise.
But get comfy because we're gonna be here, and a lot of us been here for a while already, and we're tired, so we need y'all to step up.
So, being a community organizer in the past and being involved in the community, like, I'm going to stay organized. That's what we do, you know, after this. So like it's organizing, but in ways in which we actually, like, we have a lot of power. Like, I want folks to know that, like, we have a lot of power. And there's so many lives that we can save at this moment. I can't tell you how many times Kathy Chaney caped for me. Can't tell you how many times Daryl Holiday caped for me. But we have to organize our power. How are we, you know, these Black men journalists and whatever, what are we doing for, like, the budding Black college student in J school, in media school, at the community college level? What are we doing to help them right now? When I talk about, like, activism and organizations, a lot of them people laying on the street don't have a job. Like a lot of them, like, are in between rough patches in their life and rough money. How are we offering them resources so they can sustain themselves, so we can keep the movement going? You know, it's not necessarily like what we can do on the journalism end. We can organize a lot, like I said, with the J School and whatnot. But just as Black people in general, you know, how are we making ourselves more available to the folks out here doing the damn thing when it comes to Black lives? How are we are we skill sharing with these folks, teaching them how to talk to media, teaching them what media outlets to go to? Don't trust that journalist over there. You know, they write nothing but trash pieces. Like, come over here. Like, what are we doing to sustain our movements, our radical movements? Is that, like, so no longer they wouldn't be friends. Like, I'm on Twitter and I'm in these, like, radical spaces. Marion Cobble been talking about prison abolition and defunding police 6, 7, all her life. Like she's been talking about that. If what would it look like if Black journalists got to it earlier? You know what I'm saying? Like, where would we be right now if we had that coverage earlier? If we actually took those movements and really nurtured them and really held them, you know? So, like, let's think about how to do that. Let's really be down for, like, our Black journalists coming up in the media schools, community colleges. Let's try to sustain our movements and be there for our people. So it's just all about organization, mentorship, and really paying homage to the folks who showed up for us in our lives.
Right.
All right, guys. Wow. Woo, we went well over time, and we could do this for days. Man, we may have to do a part 2. I think like you said, the streets like it.
The streets need that, man.
It's great. It's great. I do want to read this comment to you guys. I think it summarizes pretty well what, you know, the point of all this really was. If I can pull it back up.
As you pull it up, I just want to say that you moderated this masterfully.
Shout out to B. Pope.
Yeah.
Real, bro. We appreciate you.
And look, I also
there's any white publications watching a big news outlet, you feel me? Throw him the bag.
Hey, look, he national TV ready, baby.
You know what? I lost the comment, but it was from a white journalist saying how beneficial this panel was to them, being able to hear our perspectives. And so I want to thank all of you for taking the time to have this conversation. The conversations continue. The work continues. The action continues. If you're not already working with NABJ Chicago, NAHJ, and local minority journalist organizations, I encourage you to become a part of them, support Black journalists. They are the ones dismantling systems and telling our stories. And you see some of these guys right here in front of you and many more throughout the city and the country. We need them now more than ever. Thank you, brothers, so much for this.
Man, thank you guys. Look, I just want to thank all of you, man. This is such a breath of fresh air. I was depleted, drained emotionally, spiritually. This rejuvenated me. I'm ready to go put my boots on, put my construction hat, and go.
Let's get it.
We're gonna keep fighting, y'all. And we're gonna rewrite that narrative, guys. Let's keep it rocking and rolling, baby.
Let's get it. I'll see y'all later. One love. Okay?
Much love.
All right.